Kimi Antonelli's pole at Spa was not under investigation for cheating. But Mercedes had found something far more dangerous for Max Verstappen. A legal energy trick that delivered roughly 7 to 8 kilometers per hour in the final sector, for a net gain of only 9 thousandths of a second. 9 thousandths. That is almost nothing. Yet in Formula 1, it can decide pole position, the first corner, and the entire race. Mercedes achieved it by asking Antonelli to lift off the throttle just before the finish line, preserving stronger electrical deployment earlier, then accepting the slowdown where it cost less time. The technique was legal. The earlier version behind the idea had been stopped for safety reasons. And copying the new method incorrectly could risk disqualification. But while Red Bull searched for an answer, Mercedes was hiding a second crisis. Antonelli had already moved on to a fourth power unit, and one more change could trigger a real grid penalty. So the pole was safe. The advantage was real. And the greatest threat was not an illegal trick. It was whether Mercedes could keep Antonelli's engine alive long enough to use it again. Subscribe to the channel. To understand why Mercedes gained anything from this method, you first have to understand the strange problem every Formula 1 team faces at the end of a qualifying lap. The car still has speed. The driver is still pushing. The finish line is only meters away. But the electrical power can already be fading. That is the hidden weakness Mercedes identified. A modern Formula 1 car combines the internal combustion engine with electrical power. That extra electrical assistance helps the car accelerate harder, especially when the driver exits a corner and begins building speed down a straight. But the battery cannot provide maximum support forever. The team has to manage it. Use too much energy early, and the car becomes weaker later. Save too much, and the driver loses time before reaching the part of the lap where the energy was supposed to help. It is like carrying one bottle of water through a long run. Drink too much at the beginning, and there is nothing left near the finish. Save too much, and you struggle before reaching the final stretch. Mercedes had to solve that exact balance. Where should the electrical power be used? Where should it begin reducing? And how could the team protect the final sector without crossing the legal limit? That final question created the opportunity. Under the current regulations, the electrical output cannot simply disappear however the team wants. It has to reduce in a controlled way. 50 kilowatts per second. Think of lowering the volume slowly instead of switching the speaker off. The sound fades. It does not vanish instantly. For the car, that gradual reduction means the strongest electrical assistance can begin disappearing while the lap is still alive. The driver is still on the accelerator. The finish line is still ahead. But the car is no longer receiving the same push. That loss may be tiny. A few meters of weaker acceleration. A small drop in speed. Only a few thousandths on the stopwatch. But Formula 1 qualifying is decided by exactly those details. Mercedes saw the problem. Then the engineers stopped asking how to create more energy. They asked how to move the loss. That is the real genius behind the technique. The team did not invent extra battery power. It did not unlock a secret reserve. It did not ignore the regulation. It changed the moment when the driver stopped demanding full power. Antonelli lifted off the accelerator just before crossing the finish line. That one action allowed Mercedes to preserve stronger electrical deployment through more of the final sector. The car gained speed earlier. Then Antonelli accepted a small slowdown at the line. The loss still happened. Mercedes simply placed it where it hurt less. That sounds like a tiny distinction. It changed the lap. Imagine sprinting toward a doorway. You run at full speed until almost your entire body has passed through. Then you slow down. You still lose speed. But you lose it after the most valuable distance has already been covered. That is what Mercedes was doing with electrical energy. The team pushed harder through the section where the speed mattered most. Then it accepted the reduction at the point where the damage was smaller. And this is where the numbers become almost difficult to believe. When the method was analyzed at Silverstone, the Mercedes cars gained roughly 7 to 8 kilometers per hour through the final sector. That sounds like a massive advantage. But the net improvement in lap time was only around 9 thousandths of a second. Why so little? Because the driver gave some of the advantage back by lifting before the line. Mercedes gained first. Then it sacrificed part of the gain. The final result was small, but positive. And positive is all that matters when the difference between two drivers is almost invisible. 9 thousandths can separate pole position from second. 9 thousandths can decide who starts on the cleaner side of the grid. 9 thousandths can change who controls the opening corner. 9 thousandths can force every rival to redesign its qualifying approach. That is why Mercedes cared. The team did not need to find half a second. It only needed to improve the final piece of an already competitive lap. Antonelli still had to do everything else. He still had to prepare the tires. He still had to attack the braking zones. He still had to carry speed through the fast corners. He still had to avoid the smallest mistake. The energy method did not replace driver skill. It made precision more valuable. And that placed an unusual kind of pressure on Antonelli. Every instinct a racing driver develops says the same thing. Push through the finish line. Stay committed. Do not lift while the stopwatch is still running. Use every meter. Mercedes asked him to do the opposite. The line was still ahead. The lap was still alive. Verstappen was still waiting for the final time. And Antonelli had to reduce the throttle anyway. That is not easy. Not because lifting is physically difficult. Because lifting at that moment feels wrong. The driver sees the finish line approaching. His instincts tell him to remain flat. His training tells him never to surrender speed before the lap ends. But the data says the fastest choice is to lift. That requires trust. Trust in the engineers. Trust in the energy calculation. Trust in the software. Trust that the speed gained earlier is greater than the speed lost at the line. And the timing has to be exact. Lift too early, and the car throws away more time than the trick created. The advantage disappears. Lift too late, and the electrical power may not reduce inside the required legal window. Now the risk becomes far more serious. Because the method itself is legal when executed correctly. The danger appears when the execution crosses the limit. That distinction matters. Mercedes was not using an illegal system. It was operating inside a narrow legal space. And the narrower the space becomes, the more valuable experience becomes. The driver has to know the reference point. The software has to respond correctly. The battery has to reach the final sector in the expected condition. The power level has to remain compliant before the lift. The engineers have to know how much speed will be gained. They also have to know how much will be lost at the finish. This is not one button. It is a sequence. A complete chain of preparation, deployment, timing, and trust. And Mercedes already understood that chain. Its rivals were still trying to understand the final number. That gap in knowledge was almost as valuable as the speed itself. Because the first time a driver attempts a technique like this, the action can feel unnatural. He may lift too early because he fears crossing the limit. He may stay on the accelerator too long because instinct takes over. He may think so much about the finish line that he compromises the corner before it. Antonelli had to turn the entire process into one clean movement. Attack the final sector. Trust the deployment. Find the reference point. Lift. Cross the line. Complete the lap. Inside the cockpit, that sequence happens in a fraction of a second. There is no time for a long calculation. There is only preparation, instinct, and execution. And this is where Antonelli's performance becomes more impressive than the phrase battery trick suggests. Mercedes gave him the opportunity. He still had to deliver it. The system could not drive the car for him. The engineers could not lift the throttle from the garage. The data could not remove the pressure. Antonelli had to make the decision while fighting for pole against Max Verstappen. That changes the emotional weight of the lap. Verstappen is known for commitment. He attacks. He pushes. He extracts everything from the car. Mercedes gave Antonelli a weapon based on a completely different quality. Restraint. The discipline to lift. The discipline to trust the numbers over instinct. The discipline to sacrifice speed at the end because the gain had already been created earlier. That is a strange way to beat a driver like Verstappen. Not by pushing harder. By knowing the exact moment when pushing harder becomes slower. But here is where the controversy begins. This was not the first time Mercedes had explored the energy reduction rule. Earlier in the season, Mercedes and Red Bull had both found a much more aggressive method. That older version attempted to preserve maximum electrical power for longer by completely switching off the motor generator unit connected to the rear axle during the final straight. Instead of allowing the output to reduce gradually, the system could hold the full 350 kilowatts for longer. For a short period, the gain could reach between 50 and 100 kilowatts. That was not a tiny improvement. That was a major increase in available power. But the method created a serious danger. When the electrical assistant switched off, the car could suddenly lose speed. Another driver approaching from behind might not expect that change. The closing rate could become unpredictable. And at Formula One speeds, unpredictable differences can become dangerous almost immediately. The governing body stopped that technique after the Japanese Grand Prix. The reason was safety. The performance opportunity was real. So was the risk. The method could not continue. But the objective remained valuable. Preserve stronger electrical deployment for longer. Avoid losing acceleration before the finish line. Protect the final meters of the qualifying lap. Mercedes did not abandon that objective. The engineers studied why the original method had worked. They removed the dangerous part. Then they searched for another legal route. The full shutdown disappeared. The driver lift replaced it. The goal remained similar. The execution changed completely. That is why the current method feels controversial. It grew from an idea connected to a technique that had already been stopped. But the current version is not the banned version. Mercedes changed the sequence. It stayed inside the present regulation. And according to the source, the governing body confirmed that the method complied with the rules, as long as the electrical output did not reduce by more than 50 kilowatts in 1 second before the driver lifted. That is the detail that changes the entire argument. Antonelli's pole was not under an active legality investigation because of this technique. There was no confirmed attempt to remove the result. There was no official finding that Mercedes had cheated. The method was clever. It was controversial. It came from the same area of the rules as an earlier technique that had been stopped. But the current version was legal. That left Red Bull with the most frustrating kind of problem. An illegal advantage can be challenged. A legal advantage has to be beaten. Red Bull could not simply wait for Antonelli's result to disappear. The team had to understand what Mercedes had done. Then it had to decide whether the same principle could work with its own system. That would not be simple. The software could behave differently. The battery state could be different. The ideal lift point could move. The total gain might not match Mercedes. The driver would need practice. The engineers would need simulations. The team would need absolute confidence that the technique stayed inside the regulation. All of that takes time. Mercedes already had experience. The rivals had questions. And the paddock reaction showed how hidden the advantage really was. Oscar Piastri admitted that he did not even know Mercedes was using the method. That mattered because McLaren also used Mercedes' power. Andrea Stella said the discovery had surprised the team. That revealed something important. The advantage was not simply inside the engine.